Check. Hello. Okay, thank you everybody for coming. We're gonna go ahead and get started. We got our live stream started. Um, I so appreciate you guys showing up and yeah, being warm bodies in our studio audience as we do this recording. One thing that we're planning with all these, because we're going from the beginning of the Constitution to the end, the theory was line by line, right? So when we're done, we'll have the whole Constitution line by line. And so hopefully we're going to create a good series, class, something of that sort with all of Scott's wisdom.
Then we should start over for all those shiny objects.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so appreciate that. Welcome to everyone that's watching online. We are streaming on 5 different platforms tonight. I'm going to pretty much get straight into Scott, but briefly I'm going to tell you about Defending Utah and some things that we're doing. For those who don't know, my name is Enoch Moore, and I'm the founder of Defending Utah. We started this organization in 2013 to defend the principles of liberty and actually enforce and give life back to the Constitution, to our republic. That requires studying the Constitution itself. I'll tell you that I got an email. Once in a while I get these interesting emails. Actually, I get a lot of interesting emails. And I got this email to this most recent event and said, you guys are the reason we're turning into a communist state. Right? Now, how did this person even end up on my mailing list? I have no idea. And how has this person been on my mailing list for so many years and has never read anything we've ever put out, right? And this is a pretty common problem where you know, we can love our country, but all we do to preserve our country is read a few headlines and vote for a president. And that's pretty much typical for most Americans. And so the reason that this person got so upset, I think, is because I questioned, you know, what's Trump doing with the task force, the Second Amendment task force? And then, you know, this big bold, are you guys even pro-Trump, right? Now look, we are pro-Constitution. If a politician wants to decide any day of the week of his life, you know, today I'm going to start supporting the Constitution. Hey, we're on the same team from that moment forward. But we have a lot of tools that tell us who's actually on the side of the Constitution. A lot. First, the Constitution itself. Have we read the Constitution? Then you can see whose behavior aligns with that. This is not about people, our favorite politicians or personalities. It is just about the law. This goes back to the original law of Moses, where the idea was that the people had to know the law in order for them to maintain freedom in the nation of Israel at the time. And so when the people know the law, they can maintain freedom because the law is what the government has to obey. That's what we're talking about. I used to think it was strange when I would hear, law makes us free. I'm like, law tells me what to do. That doesn't sound right, right? No, it's because the law is telling the government what to do. And it's our duty to know it as a people so we can enforce it in whatever capacity we find ourselves in, right? So that said, it's kind of funny, but as much as there are people that seem to just have no idea what we're doing, there are plenty of people that do. And so we do a national call once a month with people around the nation that have picked up on this manual that we've written and are, you know, they get excited about it and they're implementing it. This manual is about how to apply the Constitution at the local level in kind of the most granular, detailed way, because we've always been about solutions, and this is kind of where we are today. For those that just are putting in the work and need information and mentorship and so forth. I also I get calls from people who just suddenly find themselves in a situation in their city and they're thinking, what do I do? And people sometimes just contact us. Hey, you guys know stuff, don't you? What I do is I give them this manual just off the top of my head because they think, hey, do you know a constitutional attorney that can solve my problem? Or do you know, they have all these ideas, do you know Senator so-and-so, or, how can we get behind, something to fix my problem? And I'm like, you're the solution to this problem. It's only, we have to stop like giving it to other people to fix our problems. So I take them straight to the end and say, I'll mentor you. You find a few people, I'll teach you how to fight this issue in your town. And so an example, there's a town in Utah where they're trying to, high density is big in every town, right? They're trying to change a highway so they can then build lots of high density and change the whole community structure. Well, people in that town are saying, we moved here for a quieter, town, and they're trying to change our community standard. And a community standard is a property right. So we go through the constitutionality of the details of their situation, and then I say, here's the arguments you need, here's a strategy you need. Now you need a few people. If you get a few people, we'll mentor you. Okay, this kind of thing happens to us a lot. Another small town where there's like 300 people that escaped, escaped. They kind of leave the city. People want to leave the city and build in just a rural area in case there's a collapse, right? Or just they want to get away from the city, and they get these homesteads and this small little area where they have 300 kind of homesteaders, and it's like a beautiful community. But even in this small town, the state and the county is coming down and trying to tell them they can't have water and trying to tell them all these things. It's not even a big city. So same thing, I'm walking them through. I'm like, you probably have way more good people in that 300-person community than a couple of tyrants that are doing these things. So if you like this kind of defense, that's what we're all about at Defending Utah, and creating these practical solutions and mentoring people. So keeping that in mind, that's why we have this. Anyone can get this if you want a free PDF. We'll share it with anyone that follows our information, but we also have physical copies that are available. And if you go to defendingutah.org, those online, you can click right now and click on our shop. This book is also available, but mostly we just want to teach and train and mentor you to solve these problems. But again, this is useless without knowing the Constitution, and that's why we do this boot camp every month. And we try to be consistent, and we have an amazing constitutional professor who has been studying the Constitution his whole life. And so that's kind of Defending Utah. Thank you. I actually talked longer than I was expecting. Thanks for humoring me. Scott, would you like to come up, and we'll turn the time over to you?
Okay, I can see the audience now then.
Just that.
Check one. Ooh.
You are good. To be on this side.
Well,
Yeah. What do you need? You want
a chair about this tall. You got a little taller. That'd be nice. Is this okay for your camera focus and everything like that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Well, maybe while you're looking for something like that, a couple of things that Enoch spoke of that dovetail right into this first set of slides. But 15 years ago, as I ran for office, and I've told some of you this story perhaps, so forgive me if you've heard it before, but others perhaps haven't. We had a big debate. There were 11 candidates, and the debate process was very lockstep and established, and everybody got one question that they answered for 2 minutes. Then everybody else did a rebuttal to theirs for 1 minute, and then they got 1 more minute to rebut everybody else. So it was a very methodical kind of, we moved through everything. Just so happens I was the final candidate to get a question. And it happened to be on the topic that we're discussing at this point, or will discuss. And so they had these written questions that the committee had put together. It was probably 400, maybe 500, almost 100% Republican county and state delegates. So this was a large meeting of activists, okay? People that were, yeah, and you saw the quotes, air quotes, because anybody that thinks they vote thinks they're an activist. And they're making progress, but generally speaking, they're not there. So anyway, my last question, they're really slow getting to it. And I'm going, come on, give me the question. You know, because first of all, we'd been sitting there for hours. I was saying, okay, it's time, let's get this over with. And anyway, the question was like, someone threw me this beautiful bait as they put their line out there. And it was this question: did the Second Amendment grant an individual right to keep and bear arms? And I went, I wanted to do this little pause. Like, that's a stupid question. You all should know the answer to that. No, I didn't say that. But it was, Then I looked up and I said, no. Well, suddenly the pitchforks and the torches came out, and the gasps, and the audience was just, they were coming up in arms over this thing. I said, well, wait, listen to the whole answer. It says, because the answer is probably one that you will like better than the one you were expecting. And the answer is, no, it did not create that. It recognized a timeless, God-given right of individuals to keep and bear arms, and they canonized it into the Constitution when they wrote that it was passed by both houses the 26th of September, 1789, and was finally ratified December 15th, 1791. At any rate, it is not something that this Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms predates parliaments, kings, presidents, congresses, municipal powers, whatever you want to call them. It predates all of that. And so this is a fundamental issue that is so poorly understood nowadays. There are over 25,000 laws in the United States now that violate the Second Amendment. And they think, they're being common sense laws. I hate to sound like look like I'm being mocking, and I guess I kind of am. But the fact of the matter is, we need some common sense laws, they always say. And by the way, that's how the 1968, dang it, why do I always get off on these side trips? I've got 3 gatherings we're going to do through our Second Amendment get together. So it will take a period of time to get through this, because most people don't even give consideration to this. But in 1968, you maybe have heard of the 1968 Gun Control Act. And that was fomented and bamboozled over the American public by Lyndon Baines Johnson. And what he did, and you can go to Lyndon Johnson library down in Texas and go read the documentation on this, but basically he said, we need to sell this to Americans. So they got 6, count them, 6 manly men from the silver screen that knew about shooting irons. You know, these guys have been cowboys and all the movies and everything like that. You'd be shocked at who really participated in this, including Charlton Heston, who became the NRA president for a number of terms. At any rate, they had these manly men that, of course, everybody knew. They knew how to use firearms. Well, I don't know if I can sit on it or break it.
I don't think it is.
Okay. Good grief. Oh, I may just fall asleep up here. No. Okay. Enoch, are we still lined up with the camera? Or have I pulled off? Okay. Thank you. So these manly men went on the evening talk shows. They sat back in their chairs. Of course, they were comfortable in the subject. And they said, we do need some common sense laws. I mean, after all, we've lost our president 5 years ago. We lost his little brother this year, and Martin Luther King. And so this is 68, remember. Call your senators and congressmen. Say, we need this to be passed. People picked up their phones in the morning and called Washington, D.C. and said, vote for this. And they did. And that's how we got the 1968 gun control, by the bamboozling of 6 silver screen props. They brought a message to the American people, and they were gullible enough to follow it.
Were they paid?
Were they paid? I don't know the answer to that question. Well, it does. Well, think of the COVID con. Okay, think of all these celebrities that took the coin to be able to stand for it. Oh, I don't know. I didn't see any receipts. Okay, but I've gone to some of the like presidential. I think it's too short. I'll try this for a little while. Thank you. I actually bought a chair the other day and was going to bring it tonight. It's a really cool chair. You'll love it when you see it. But what we have found is that we've got to leave our home 3 to 3.5 hours before we're supposed to be here if we're going to avoid the traffic problems. And we didn't do that tonight. And so I was 4 minutes late when I walked in the door, but then I still had to set this up. Enoch can edit this out later. But at any rate, yeah, so at any rate, I didn't bring the chair. But it sure is nice to sit down when you're doing a couple hours of presentation. So, it is an individual God-given right. It predated everything you can think of. Silver screen celebrities, or not, just like the COVID con, they get these schlocks that come in and sell their souls. They're kind of like harlots, I think, but at any rate, I would call them a varlet at least. Look that up. That'll go into your dictionary sometime. But what Enoch brought up in the beginning was, what? Aren't you a Trump fan? What's wrong with you? And it's like, there's a lot of really good ideas, but when it comes to Second Amendment, he and Pam Bondi are like this. Red flag law advocates. For those of you that don't know what a red flag law is, it's where somebody in your community, someone in your circle, whatever you want to call it, decides that you potentially are a danger to yourself or the public. And consequently, somebody ought to order you to give up your guns. So they have an ex parte hearing. What an ex parte hearing is when they go before a judge without you or your attorney there. You don't even know this meeting's happening. They go there with advocates that want to take your guns. Nobody else gets to talk. You may be a fine, upstanding, clean-cut young man or woman, and somebody's saying, I've noticed they've been pretty depressed lately, or whatever. I think we ought to, for their safety and ours, we ought to take their guns. Well, whatever, and you pick a judge that, pretty well has that interest in mind. So they issue a judicial order for them to pick up your guns. So they show up at 5 a.m. at your front door, and when you come to the door in your jammies, because you got out of bed, and they say, we're here to pick up your guns, and they say, the heck you are, and they reach for their trusty 6-shooter, they kill them on their front porch. And this has happened, and this is the problem with red flag laws. And what Trump actually said during his first administration was, let's take the guns, and the due process thing we'll take care of later. That isn't America. That isn't America, not the way the Founding Fathers established it. So he and Bondi, his Attorney General, are extremely pro-red flag laws. And in fact, under their tutelage, Congress passed red flag law funding to give money to municipalities and communities and states to be able to help them facilitate red flag laws. They didn't make a it would be unconstitutional. Faux pas, I was going to say, by having a federal government do it. They just set aside funds so that your local town can set up a red flag program in their town. Okay, so I have some grave concerns about this. Enoch also mentioned something that Trump announced, and I've got it right here. February 7th, he put out a directive that Pam Bondi has bonded with, if you will, and it's called Protecting Second Amendment Rights. It came out of the White House the 7th of February. And you're going to hear I'm going to read the whole document to you. It's not that long. But I wanted to start with that because it sounds so noble and good, and we're so excited. And as I was reading the first 2/3 of it, I'm going, woo woo. But we get to the last part and we go, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away, and it could be a problem. So that's why some people say, oh, don't you support Trump? We say, well, if he's doing the right thing, yes, but if it's not, it's not. And we've got to point, I don't care who you are unless you're Jesus Christ. I don't think anybody's absolutely signed up from that. Only I heard the Trump the other day say he wouldn't mind being Pope. So I don't know if that's how close to one thing or farther away. I don't know. It's your religious belief. Just go with what you got. At any rate, he comes out with this thing the 7th of February. And as far as I know, I have not seen any outcome on this at all, any output, any feedback, any nothing. But here's the document. By the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, it is hereby ordered. Section 1. We're not going to argue about where executive orders go and why they're unconstitutional. In most instances, they're being used. No legislative authority and everything else like that. They're going to control and guide America. But nevertheless, this is what the document actually says. Okay, it is hereby ordered, Section 1, purpose, the Second Amendment is an indispensable safeguard of security and liberty. So far, so good. I'm not going to comment on every sentence. It is preserved the right of American people to protect themselves, our families, our freedoms, since the founding of our great nation. Because it is foundational to maintaining all other rights held by Americans, the right to keep and bear arms must not be infringed. I kind of like this. Section 2, plan of action. A, within 30 days of this date of the order, the Attorney General shall, now, February 7th, March, April, May, we're 3 months into this already, aren't we? Okay, the Attorney General, that's Pam Bondi, shall examine all orders, regulations, guidance plans, international agreements, and other actions of executive departments and agencies to assess any ongoing infringement of the Second Amendment rights of our citizens and present a proposed plan of action to the President through domestic policy advisor to protect the Second Amendment rights of all Americans. Man, I'm eating this up. B, in developing such proposed plan of action, the Attorney General shall review at a minimum. Now listen to all these things, because most people have never thought of the fact that all of these agencies of the general government are agencies that are impinging upon the Second Amendment. That says nothing about your local municipalities or your states. At any rate, so they're going to look at minimum all presidential and agencies' actions from January 20th, 2021 through January 2025. What was that? Oh, that was Biden's administration. And like, for example, I've got a very good friend that had, until that time, a federal firearms license that he used, to sell firearms and work on firearms and so on. But the administration, the Biden administration, created such a difficult set of hoops to jump through that he got caught. And I don't remember if this is exactly the circumstance, but in one box on the form, how many you're supposed to write O-N-E, he wrote 1. It was a numeral. And bingo, this is a flagrant violation of the law. So they revoked his license, okay? So these presidential agencies that existed during the Biden years that purport to promote safety but may have impinged on the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. 2, rules promulgated by the Department of Justice, including the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, BATFE, if you've thought of those guys, from January 2021 through January 2025, still just the Biden times, okay? I got news for you. The Federal Firearms Act of 1934 was a flagrant violation of everything that was intended originally by the American Founding Fathers. Just as a side note, because I don't think I talk about this in this presentation. Haven't even read through it yet because we were so late. At any rate. Oh, the what?
Obama did that.
Yeah.
Well, to Mexico.
Well, that was, he was doing straw man purchases to destroy the Second Amendment. But that's another destroying story we may get to. But the Federal Firearms Act of 1934, among other things, made it illegal for individuals to own a short-barreled shotgun. And so some guys that were into contraband, they were bootleggers, got picked up with a short-barreled shotgun. They'd both died off by the time it got to the Supreme Court. That's a long story. I'm very much truncating it. But the fact of the matter is, their attorney nor them appeared before the Supreme Court as they appealed this clear to the Supreme Court. They were dead and gone by then, by 1939 when this got there. And the Supreme Court justices, interestingly enough, some of them had served in World War I, and they knew very well that short-barreled shotguns were used in World War I as trench sweepers. They were very effective at coming over the edge of a trench and making sure you didn't have any unfriendly fire coming your way. They were used prolifically. In fact, shotguns have been used as long as there had been shotguns, including back to when there were blunderbusses in the 1600s, but certainly during the Civil War too. But it came down to this. If the defense had been there, they could have said something about this. But there was no defense. There was no defendants. It was only the general government, the attorneys from the United States who were presenting this to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court goes something like this. Is there anyone in the group that can bring forth evidence that these short-barreled shotguns have ever been used in a military environment? Having heard none, there must not be any. And so they made a ruling based upon the fact that they had not been used in a military environment and therefore were not legal for people to own. Huh? You might say. I'm going to write a book someday and call it, huh? It's going to have to be an audio book because you can't write, huh? And have it make its point. But the point of the matter is, these guys had been in the war. They knew very well what had happened, but because nobody presented the evidence in the court, the National Firearms Act of 1934 was approved as being constitutional. These jackasses that we have sitting in high places, and that's the nicest thing I can say about them. Sorry, guys. At any rate, so that's what they turn to now. Oh, the 1934 Firearms National. Obviously, they violated that. They ruled that if you want to spin this into a full logical reason, if something has previously been used in a military environment, it's full game for the use and carrying of American citizens. But because nobody said that in the court, they ruled we can outlaw these things. That's the basis of what so many of these laws are coming by. Okay, but see, this thing that Trump put out in February of this year, we're looking January 20th, 2021 to 2025, okay? Pertaining to firearms and or federal licensees. Just a second. Agencies' plans, orders, and actions regarding the so-called enhanced regulatory enforcement policy pertaining to firearms and or federal firearms licensees. Reports and related documents issued by the White House Office of Gun Violence Protection. Again, he's looking back into the Biden days. Positions taken by the United States in any and all ongoing and potential litigation that affects or could affect the ability of Americans to exercise their Second Amendment rights. Agencies' classifications of firearms and ammunition. Okay, now, here this stuff has a frangible expiration date. When Biden left office, we ain't going to look at it anymore. But in addition to that, how far back do you go to recognize infringements of this God-given right? It's a 4-year window, people. To me, that's a fatal flaw because the vast majority, Obama, which was before Biden, you might remember, he tried to make it so that if you were hand loading your ammunition, you basically had to have a bunker on your home site to prevent any possible damage from a ignition of your powder. Anyway, yeah, it's perfectly logical, common sense stuff, everything. But most people don't have a clue what's involved in any of these things. Okay, then going on to number 6. Agencies' classifications of firearms and ammunition, and 7, the processing of applications to make, manufacture, transfer, or export firearms. Section 3, implementation upon submission of the proposed plan of action described in Section 2 of this order. The Attorney General shall work with the Domestic Policy Advisor to finalize the plan of action and establish a process for implementation. Section 5, we could talk about each one of these, but we got to get through some other things tonight. General provisions, A. Oh, now we get to the weasel words, to the caveats, to the, I just want to make sure that we still got all our options open kind of things. Okay, nothing in this order shall be construed to impair or otherwise affect, 1, the authority granted by law to an executive department, agency, or the head thereof, BATFE. Congress delegated, quote unquote, because they can't constitutionally do that, to them the authority to make the laws about having a bunker on your site in order to hand load, whatever. Okay, by the way, that got overruled because there was enough public outcry about it. Or 2, the functions of the Director of the Office of Management and Budget relating to budgetary, administrative, or legal proposals. What the heck? So there's money attached that may get in the way of this, or B, this order shall be implemented consistent with the applicable law and subject to the availability of appropriations. Oh, so if Congress doesn't, through Article 1, Section 7 and Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7, put money against this, it all goes by the wayside. And then this final portion, this order is not intended to and does not create any right or benefit, substantive or procedural, enforceable, outlaw, or inequity by any party against the United States, its departments, agencies, or entities, its officers, employees, or agents, or any other person. So if you got an argument with this, you're right, probably, okay? So that's how this program came out. And people say, well, don't you love Trump? I say, well, first of all, he's a red flag guy. And second of all, why all weasel words, okay? You can take him at his face value. He wants to protect the Second Amendment. Okay, that's what people say. Well, let's just look here. Here's an example of how far these noble-sounding commissions can go away from the original intent. I've talked to some of you before about this in our discussion of religious liberties. Back in September 2016, Obama's Commission on Civil Rights put out a 296-page document regarding this thing about rights. Okay, it was complete weasel words. They wanted to define specifically under the religious liberties stuff like, shall no law about this establishment of religion or anything like this. It's exclusive. Congress can't dink around with this. But what this group did, that when they went into their organization and held their committee meeting in September and they put this out, it was titled Peaceful Coexistence, Reconciling Non-Discrimination Principles with Liberties, a briefing before the United States Commission on Civil Rights. Okay, it's the title, so the weasel words start. I'm not going to go through and read all of these, but basically they were seeking to set official policy in regards to religious liberty based on the most narrow definition of religious liberty that they could come up with. This was a commission that was established by Obama to make sure that we understood religious liberty was protected. Anyway, what? Huh? Yeah, H-U-H. But it's got this emphasis on it, So what they're saying is you got to carefully define narrowly, fact-specific basis so you don't get too much religious liberty, folks, because it's going to interfere with the civil rights we have defined separately based upon things such as gender and color and economic status and all those kind of things. Okay, so again, you can read over these. These recommendations literally came out in the document, 296 pages. So at the bottom, I'm kind of capsulized that religious liberty should not get in the way of government-created mandates. And this one, reading the bottom, government intends to limit and control religious liberties to assure that they are able to legislate and mandate in a broad spectrum of matters previously excluded. See, they can say, I know it says you got the right to worship and all this kind of stuff, but by golly, you taking this position, you become a bigot when you do this. or your business isn't taking care of the right to kill unborn babies, because everybody needs to have that right, Just because you have a religiously held belief, you can't exercise that in the workplace. You're getting the idea. Here's the next one. Federal case law created in the courts, not the Constitution, is to prevail. So they're specifically identifying court cases where they say, these guys set the standard, not the Constitution, okay? Number 4, federal legislation should be created to counter the real intent of the First Amendment and usurp powers not delegated, okay? And so they want us to comply with the commission's usurpations, and here's what the commission chairman, Martin Castro, I don't know if he's somebody's brother or not, but at any rate, you know what I'm talking about, Fidel and his brotherhood. The phrases religious liberty and religious freedom will stand for nothing except hypocrisy, so long as they remain code words for discrimination, intolerance, racism, sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia, Christian supremacy, or any form of intolerance. See, you can believe and say anything you want as long as it fits our political agenda, okay? So here we go back to the simple, straightforward wording of the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Oh, no, we can't have that. It's got to be narrowly defined so that we can fit all of our other government-created nonsense ahead of it, okay? Simple words twisted by a commission into another belief system. So here's the simple words of the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia. By the way, I'm going to say this now in case I forget to say it or I don't get there in time. I got it. This thing's got wheels on it. Wished I had brakes too. Anyway, a well-regulated militia. Okay, now here's what I'm trying to say to you. Count the commas. Okay? Now, there's 3. This is the form that was passed by Congress by a 2/3 margin. When it was sent out to the states, it only had 1 comma, and the states ratified the 1 comma. I prefer the 1 comma. It makes much more sense to me. There's punctuation in those days was kind of, you threw it in for good measure. Rhetorical pause. A well-regulated militia be necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay. Now, this is how it was passed by Congress. And again, it's rhetorical pauses they were looking for there, I think. The part that was ratified by the states only had 1, and you're going to watch for this later on as we get into this. But you get these little nuanced things. This is the one, the 1 comma 1 is the one St. George Tucker uses in all of his writing. It's the one the states all ratified. It's the one that if there were anything that were saying this takes precedence over that, I'd say the 1 comma 1. I prefer the 1 comma, yeah.
Could it be that the 1 comma went out because that was a presentation of written words, and the 3 comma version was a presentation of speaking pattern?
It could very well be. I don't know why they passed the 3 comma 1, other than what I attribute it to is, let's throw a comma in here to give a pause so you can think about it. I don't know. And it may have been during speech that was given. I prefer the 1 comma 1, but people that are familiar with the use of punctuation and commas and English language have reconciled these things and say it means the same thing regardless. So it's kind of a mood issue, but Tucker uses the 1 comma 1. I believe it's more straightforward and less room for people to wiggle and say any of the things you want to argue with. Yes?
It depends on what the definition of is.
You're right. If Bill Clinton were here, he could debate that with you. Is means what, anyway? Or alone means what? Anyway, another set of weasel words. So, having said all of that, that's why I'm concerned about what Trump put out on February 7th. The lead-in 2/3 part to me is very, wow, this is good. Except for the fact he keeps narrowing it to the 4-year period, and except for the fact he puts those weasel words at the end and say, yeah, wait a minute, but if we come up with some other good things, we can't block those either. I mean, and I don't know as he thought through those things or not. But that's why sometimes the simple, straightforward, plain English statement, and we during this issue or episode or whatever get together we have, we're going to talk about militia and a free state and the right of the people to keep and bear arms. Yeah.
It's obviously not written by him. He doesn't speak that way. So he's got someone there that's betraying him.
Someone, you know what? Okay, so the question for those of you out in the Never Never Land, a lot of people want to cut Trump a lot of slack. They want to give him every benefit of the doubt, and I love to do that too, but when we see time after time, his first administration was fraught with bad advice. He had some weasels in the middle of his organization. He seems to have chosen better now, but I don't know because, and he maybe doesn't understand this, this idea of how these weasel words can actually give power to twisting it out of control. I don't know, but that's the thing I say we got to watch. We got to watch it. But if we, the people, don't understand these things, see the right of the people there to keep and bear arms? A lot of people say, oh, that's the state. Yeah, it is. The right of the people of your state to keep and bear arms. It has nothing to do with you as an individual. And that's why that question, I believe, was given to me in that debate. Does it grant an individual right? And the answer is no, because it was there before the thing came along, But that thing with the people, try putting, instead of people, try putting the state in the Fourth Amendment, for example. You can't just interchange it. People are people, not an entity like a state. Anyway, so that is kind of the foundation, and we're into this an extended period of time already, and I haven't even really started my presentation. But I thought you'd have to understand why there's a concern about some of the things that were said in the lead up to this get-together about why we ought to have concerns. Okay, so part one. Time to start, almost an hour after we were supposed to start. Okay, now I white out a lot of the things in this because, just read, here's the Second Amendment. You can read that, sure. The right to keep and bear arms. Oh, I'm not presenting, you're right. There we go. How about that, sports fans? Okay, good. Thank you for that good call. Okay, the right of the people to keep and bear arms. Okay. It's not a collective right of the state. It's not just a pleasurable pastime. Okay? People say, oh, yeah, you ought to be able to have the right to keep and bear arms to go hunting or target shooting or whatever. It's not a lifestyle. While all of those things are great, the real reason for it is it's an individual God-given right. It's one of our inalienable rights. It didn't create the right. It was vouchsafed by the Constitution. Again, it predates the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, kings, parliaments, presidents, everybody. It is a right granted by our Creator. It has everything to do with preserving mankind's freedom from tyranny. And just to tell you, some years ago, probably a good 20, 25 years ago, I was asked to speak at a women's organization. There was 400 or 500 women there. And I got up. It was women's issues, I said, I'm going to talk to you about the right to keep and bear arms. Oh, I'm going to go get something to eat. It was like they were going to migrate out of there. And the first thing I did, I said, just before you go, if you don't think this is pertinent to you, I want to have you hear something. And so I had brought a cassette tape. That's how long ago it was. Do they still have cassette tapes? No. Anyway, I brought a cassette tape and I popped it into the audio system. It was a 911 call of a young mother. And there was someone breaking into her home. And she called 911. She was desperate. Breathlessly desperate. And the tension just built during the call. And she was talking to another woman on the end of the phone And go into your bedroom and lock the door. I'm in the bedroom, the door's locked. Okay, well, anyway, he's at the door. He's at the door. And so anyway, it degraded and went down. He broke through the door. He was in there with her. And you heard her screams and everything else like that. And I says, now, how many of you'd like to hear about this? And it was like, I mean, everybody all of a sudden was all ears. They're fully engaged and fully focused. If anything, this is a woman's issue. I'm telling you. Well, I don't know. I could tell you lots of different stories about some of the things that have happened. But it has everything to do with this protection of life, liberty, and property. Okay, so this idea of property and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, it's as old as history. And we're going to talk about the Middle Ages and Old Testament and things like that in a minute. It's the right of free men. We're going to talk about in England to bear arms. In fact, this was something the founding fathers considered themselves free men by virtue of their fact that they were English. And Blackstone, and I was going to bring, I used to bring a whole trunk of books when I'd come to talk to people. I'd hold this one up. You got to read this one. Oh, this one's pretty cool too. I don't do that anymore because it hurt my back too much carrying them around. But the point of the matter is, as Blackstone wrote about free men, and the people in these colonies in North America considered themselves free men by virtue of what their heritage was as English men. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. We don't have time to tell it all because it's too cool a story and there's too many shiny objects in there, right? Anyway, that's what they thought about it in colonial America. And this guy named Cesar Beccaria, he was a contemporary of the American founding fathers. He lived in Italy. Pretty smart dude. We're going to read a little bit about what he wrote. And by the way, some of his stuff is so modern in its application, even though he wrote it clear back in the 1700s. We're going to read a little bit and talk about Blackstone's commentaries a little bit. So we're going to consider the Middle Ages, free men, England, view of the arms, Beccaris, and all of these things, the American Revolutionary War experience, and after. How we got to the Second Amendment. I just gave a presentation to a fairly good group of young people with their parents about what happened in the Revolutionary period. And it was phenomenal, the lessons that they learned that we have forgotten. And when I made the presentation to the people, of course, the young people we'd have assumed have never heard of it, but I was absolutely astounded. And my wife was particularly taken by the fact that the adults had never heard of this before. It wasn't just Second Amendment stuff, but it had to blend into that. But we don't have time for that tonight because that presentation was an hour long, wasn't it, Tamara? And we're already an hour into this and I haven't even hardly started this. Okay, so the story to prevent the right to keep and bear arms is as old as history. So let's go back to the Old Testament, 1 Samuel 13. Now there was no smith, meaning a blacksmith. That didn't mean Jim Smith or Sammy Smith or whoever. It meant a blacksmith, okay? Found throughout all the land of Israel, for the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make them swords or spears. So the Philistines did not want anybody to have arms by which they could push back, okay? So they wouldn't let them have a blacksmith, okay? But all the Israelites went down to the Philistines to sharpen every man his share, his coulter, his axe, and mattock. We'll define those terms in just a minute. We don't use them too much because we're not on the earth as much. And then in verse 21, yet they, the Philistines, had a file for the mattocks and for the coulters and for the forks and for the axes to sharpen goads. Poke, goad. Okay, remember when I told you about the time that I said that it was not, the Second Amendment didn't create the right for individual? And remember how the farmers and the craftsmen that were there brought out their pitchforks and they were gonna poke me with them? That's kind of hearkening back to that, okay? So it came to pass in the day of battle that there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people that were with Saul and Jonathan, but with Saul and Jonathan his son there was found. Oh, so Saul and his son had arms. That's a pretty small amount. By the way, do you know how many sometimes I hate to even ask the question. Don't raise your hand. But have you heard of the Warsaw Uprising in World War II? Okay, just because most haven't. The Jews were in an enclosed ghetto like Gaza. Okay, only it was Jews in it, and they were in Warsaw. And the Germans were starving them to death. They didn't let them have medical, food, water. They didn't let them have any arms at all. And they were just attrition. They were being ground out. And there were 6 handguns that they found among the group. And they found their courage to go after the Germans with 6 handguns. I mean, these guys had MG-34s, MG-40. Oh, they didn't have 42s in those days. MG-34s at least. They're machine guns, belt-fed, cool firearms. You know, they had all their Mausers and their bazookas and their grenades and all of their tanks and all of their artillery, but the Jews had 6 firearms. And they started an uprising. It was do or die, man. And the Germans brought in and they leveled their community with, artillery and tanks. But it's put them on the run for a little while. The Germans were taking it back. Oh, wait a minute, they're shooting back at us, But it was a really tough, lost battle. And Saul and his son had a weapon. That's about it there. Holy cow. Okay, so look at a share. This is from Noah Webster's Dictionary, 1828. So I just, highlighted, well, it's not, I guess it's underlined. A share is a blade of a plow. A coulter is a fore-iron of a plow. An axe, you know what that is, chopping down wood, whatever. A mattock is a grubbing hoe. A goad is a pointed instrument to prod a beast. Move along, kind of like what the police do when you're out on a, demonstration. Okay, in other words, these were instruments that could be used as a weapon. You can easily transfer these things to another application. Okay, a pokey stuff can be used for a lot of different things. Okay, so that was how it was back in the Old Testament times. And the necessity of being armed was really critically important. Okay, so during the Middle Ages, let's talk about that for a second. Wished you had time to hear about an hour and a half on this guy, Alfred the Great. Cool dude, man. He was the king of the Anglo-Saxons. There's the dates he was in. Those are AD dates. So he did the legal system, the common law, military capability, but he required all of his people to be armed to help defend the nation. You guys all got to have guns. Well, they weren't guns in those days, but you got to have swords and spears and all this kind of stuff. So he had the tradition of armed free men. He started that. Armed free men in England. Anybody that was a free man could have arms. Now that's long since passed, and we're going to quote, if I get to it. We got to hang somebody's coat over that clock up there. It's one of my worst enemies when I get here. At any rate, this is what Alfred the Great started. Okay, here's my coat. I'm really not going to have you hang it up. I'm not going to take it off. It's summer already in this room. Oh my goodness. Then I can say whatever I want, can't I? I said some things on a radio program today that may come back to haunt me because I was very blunt about certain political actions by certain individuals. Can you still hear okay back there? We got a good audio? I'm perfect. First thing I've done right all day long. Anyway, okay. These free men had a long history of right to keep and bear arms, from Alfred the Great forward. A really incredible individual. Think of King Arthur, I mean, this guy was well beloved by his people. Okay, so this tradition was continued as they went forward. The Assize of Arms in 1181, it was a proclamation of King Henry II, not the 8th, the profligate, immoral, licentious king that created the Church of England, not him. Established obligations of certain classes of people to have arms. You've got to do it. This is a law. And in 1689, the English Declaration of Rights protected the freedom to people to have arms for their own defense and restored this right, which James II took away. You know, the King James Version, if you knew the history about that, you'd know it was put together by a guy that pretty self-centered, egotistical, evil, mean, bad, and nasty, and a tyrant. Okay, so anyway, going forward, a lot of straight stories that I can't tell you. Colonial America was established by free Englishmen. That's what they considered themselves. I wished I had brought commentaries on the laws of England by Blackstone. Very, very good. Just for the interest sake, maybe nobody today has, other than my wife. She's read every book, I think, that Louis L'Amour wrote. Yeah. She never realizes she's read them before until she gets in the last chapter. Why? Because there's so much commonality of these things. It's like, I think I've been there before. Oh, yeah, I have been. Anyway, he quotes guys like Montesquieu and Blackstone and Plutarch and things like that. People don't even know who these people are anymore. But Louis L'Amour wrote about him. He put a lot of realism in his Western series. Okay, so because the people that came to America considered themselves English citizens, free men under English tradition, they kept with that tradition in that they created law in keeping with the right to keep and bear arms. So in colonial Virginia law, now you're going to note that we are so far from this today. Virginia, Massachusetts, I mean, you're going to say, huh? They have that heritage? I mean, come on, people. But under Virginia colonial law, travelers were required to be armed. You had to be. Where's your gun? I ain't got one. Uh-oh, I'm going to write you a ticket. It wasn't quite that way. But at any rate, everybody was supposed to be armed when they traveled. You had to do Sunday target practice. Hey, a lot of kids would go to church willingly if they had to do target practice after that. You know, holy cow. I look for a job, they let you shoot on the job. Anyway, church attendees must be armed. All households must have operational firearms. They recognized this as one of the absolutes that they had to have within their society. And government gave you a firearm if you couldn't afford one. You had to pay for it when you could, though. Okay, so they were they were all in on this concept of the right to keep and bear arms. Under Massachusetts, now you think Virginia's bad. Look at what Massachusetts used to be. Required to be armed or be fined. Okay, man, how things have changed. Okay, well, the Declaration of Independence, 1776. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. They were endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. So, the primary pursuit of government, which the founders believed and which this nation once believed, was to secure God-given rights. It was not to take them away. And we have come to that point so often, particularly in large cities, which have a greater tendency to be socialistic in nature, particularly if they have a university in the city, which a lot of big cities do have, unfortunately. So governments were to secure God-given rights. Here's this Italian guy that I told you, lived during the same period as the American founders, but he didn't live here, okay? And so I have him down if you want to go look him up and review him. And this thing at the very bottom on crimes and punishment was a book he wrote back in 1764, you know, right between the French and Indian War and the Revolutionary War. And he had some very interesting observations about crime and punishment that I think we would find somewhat contrary to how we do things now. But anyway, he was an Italian jurist, a philosopher, a politician, and he wrote this cool book. Okay, so here's what he wrote. The laws that forbid the carrying of arms disarm those only who are neither inclined nor determined to commit crimes. Such laws make things worse for the assaulted and better for the assailants. They serve rather to encourage than to prevent homicides, for an unarmed man may be attacked with greater confidence than an armed man. Hey, you got a gun? No. Oh, good. Hand me your wallet. Okay. Well, and then you think of the young woman with her baby that were home alone when the intruder broke in. So we've forgotten these principles in modern America, sadly. Here's Blackstone. We've talked about him. He wrote just before the American Revolution. He wrote 4 volumes between 1765 and 1769 that were brought to America. All of the founding fathers diligently and devotedly studied Blackstone's writings, along with Montesquieu and Locke, of course, the scriptures. Okay, so Blackstone outlined commentaries on the laws of England. And he talks about a whole gob of things in there, about your right to travel, about your right to self-defense, about the illegality, let's put it that way, of killing a baby before they get born. I mean, the founding fathers understood this. They reviewed this. The black robe judges can't even understand the stuff that the founders based their government on. And what happened, by the way, is that he said that unborn babies have standing before the law. They are legal human beings, in other words. And he gives examples of how you can prove that with the law. Yes, sir.
Unborn babies have standing, and yet just an hour ago you were saying that the gun laws of 1934 went into effect because no one was there to say that these weapons were used in war.
Right.
Um,
If we don't know our rights, we don't know our history, we don't know the principles, poof, gone.
But here these people respected the rights of even someone unborn, and they can't present themselves or even speak.
Okay, there's so many things wrong with the way we're doing things now. You're pointing out a very great truism. See, the baby can't speak, but those of us that can speak on behalf because we know what's going to come. Okay, same with the Second Amendment kind of stuff. There was no one in their court, so they blew it off. And there's no black robe judge now, well, I don't know of any, let's put it that way, that will stand for the rights of the unborn and call them a living human being, because they are, except they haven't drawn breath. In every other regard, they're a living human being. Okay. Okay, well, we're getting distracted a little bit by abortion, but the fact of the matter is, I'm going to get distracted even more for just a second. Good heavens. I'm a third of the way through the presentation. And we only got maybe 45 minutes left. It'll be okay. I probably ought to set this aside for a little while. Maybe we'll come back to it. But the fact of the matter is, we are in a real mess. I'll just make a little brief commentary about this. How many of you saw Tucker Carlson's interview with Putin? Okay? If you haven't seen it, go find it. Watch it carefully. I mean, Tucker missed a few really good questions. Had I been there, I was asked after, what would you have asked him? Boy, I'm glad you asked. Anyway, I was like, why the heck didn't he ask this? Anyway, he didn't. He missed some marvelous opportunities. But Putin schooled Carlson. He took him to the woodshed and spanked him. Not really, literally. But Putin has a magnificent context of history with his country and with the world. And we don't have that anymore of our own country anymore. And because of that, we can't keep things in a context of why it's important. And Putin walked Tucker Carlson through the analysis, the discussions, and the decisions that were made based upon an historical perspective that he could document well and justify things with. So we don't do that anymore. And you're so astute to point out the fact that, oh, they threw out the Second Amendment because there's no one in the court to speak for it. We're throwing out the babies because no one can speak. Oh, wait, we can, but we don't. Okay. Anyway, we don't have these perspectives to hang our hats on. Okay, so the founders studied these things. All of them did, among others. Okay, so here's what Blackstone wrote in his first volume of commentaries. The whole discussion up to this point in this area was about self-defense. So I put it in parenthetical statement because it would have taken me 2 or 3 other paragraphs to even begin to put a context to it. Justly called the primary law of nature, so it is not, neither can it in fact be taken away by the laws of society. Society can't take away your right to defend yourself. That's an immoral thing. And the laws of nature and nature's God, okay, that phrase is taken right out of Blackstone's commentary in the first volume. you can go, if you've read these things, you'll be reading the Declaration of the Constitution or whatever, and you go, oh, I remember reading this. It was in such and such. Founders knew this stuff cold. So this idea of self-defense can't be taken away. Okay. Okay, so they brought this understanding and heritage into the Revolutionary War. Okay. There are natural tendencies for tyrants to seek to disarm and subjugate people. Look at the Philistines, okay, for example. You look at what Hitler did. I mean, you pick any tyrant that you want and you'll find that they don't like armed slaves. Okay. So, and I spoke extensively about this on Wednesday night to this group of young people and their parents. Through the 1770s, the British started to tighten the screws on the American colonies. I could have or should have put in maybe a whole list of these restrictive, onerous burdens that were placed upon them. But among them, they said, oh, manufacturing or importing powder, you have to have powder to use a firearm, by the colonies. They took strict control over that. Okay, so they continued to grow, and they restricted the amount of powder that you could have to the minimum they thought the colonists would need for their hunting. How many deer do you think your family needs every year? So how many rounds is that? At 70 grains per? I mean, come on, yeah.
This is modern gun control too. They're equating gun rights to hunting.
Absolutely. It's a hunting issue. And I said earlier, it's not hunting, it's not plinking, it's not target shooting. It has to do with something very different than that. But nowadays they're saying, oh, you shouldn't be able to have an AR. Who needs an AR with a 30-round mag? I mean, how many does it take to knock down a deer? I mean, it's the wrong question. But they're trying to equate it, as you say, to hunting. And this thing with Obama, when he was doing the powder hand-loading stuff, it came down to the powder stuff that the American founders faced in the 1770s with the English tyrants. So now you could do the math. How many deer do your family need a year? Do you take 2 shots or just 1 to get your deer? I mean, well, I only need 1, obviously. Anyway, so let's see. If you've got 70 grains of black powder and you do that, how many often you need 1? Oh, you're going to try and do a deer every week? Are you kidding? 50 times 70 grains. Okay. Okay, here's your allocation of powder for the year. Okay. That's how asinine this actually became. The minimum they thought the colonists would require to do their hunting survival. They were getting pretty restrictive. Okay, so in Massachusetts, now remember April 19th, 1775? Okay, this is 2 years, well, a year and a half before that. The governor, Gage, went to Somerville. They seized a large quantity of gunpowder from the people in Massachusetts, in Somerville, Massachusetts. Okay, then the next year, in April, so 6 months later, the governor of Virginia, again a king's officer, confiscated the colonists' store of gunpowder. This was an active thing that was going on. So he also disabled the firearms in the town magazine. That's a magazine. It's not the thing you buy at the grocery store as you're checking out. It has to do with where you store your firearms and ammunition, okay? And that is referred to in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, by the way, if you ever want to go back and read that. So this was an active engagement by the king's officers. And when this stuff started, the screws started getting tightened down on people, and they started to get this onerous feeling over them and everything like that. And by the way, the things that were happening were minimal compared to what our government is doing today. If you take all levels of government, from your municipality to your county to your state to the general government, the national government, they were really free, and we're saying, what do they had cause to complain about? What's wrong with those guys? This was a 2% tax. We do way over that every time we do anything, right? Anyway, so during this period of time, they didn't have internet. You might remember that from the 1770s. No cell phones, no radios, no CNN, none of that stuff. Yeah, unfortunately, they come along later, and they should have never been born. But the fact of the matter is, they set up what they call committees of correspondence. And so these guys they would, in their own colony, they would look at stuff that's going on. They would collate ideas and, kind of evidence, if you will. They'd go to other colonies and they went to the villages and townships around there and they shared these things person to person, one-on-one. Now think about this for a minute. These guys used what they had to share the word. And we can't even very often do the right thing with the technology we've got. There's stuff we could spread gobs and gobs on instantaneously. Click. You have 500 people that get to see it. Anyway, so during this period of time, the committees of correspondence, these individuals, Paul Revere was one of them, by the way, that would go out in the surrounding villages and townships around Boston. And there was quite a number of other men that were doing that, and they were sharing it between colonies and everything else like that. They went and met with people in their churches, in their taverns, in their village greens, wherever they got a chance to talk to them. So the people knew Paul Revere's voice. He had credibility. How many of our voices have any credibility if we were to talk to anybody today? Never heard of that guy. So what? What?
We do. I've changed votes among the Republican state delegates on the day of the vote.
Well, that's cool, but you know what? I don't want to complain about that because you're doing the right thing. But I'm here to tell you we could do a lot more. Maybe you do all you can, but I'm here to tell you there's gobs of people that should be paying more attention. We need more friends. So what happened on this April 18th when the Brits, they called them the regulars, they didn't say the redcoats were coming or the British were coming. Everybody was British, for crying out loud. They were all free Englishmen. And so they called them the regulars. These were regular army guys. The regulars are coming. That's what Paul Revere and there are others in the committees of correspondence who were near Boston. We think there was about 40 that rode that night. It wasn't just Paul Revere. There was gobs of others. And 40 is not gobs, but you're going out and you're taking your little circuit. There's quite a number of villages you could inform. By the way, the people found out what was going on, and that the Brits were on the way to Lexington and Concord, and so they had first blood. By the way, I'm going to recommend again something I recommend to the young people when I spoke to them Wednesday night. It says you got to get this movie. It's a movie called April Morning. Howard Fast wrote the book in 1961. I think the movie was made in 85, 87, 88, somewhere in there. And the book was supposed to be an anti-war book, but it really just explained what went and happened that April morning, April 19th. It's kind of a love story between a couple of love-struck teenagers, and Tommy Lee Jones is in it, so it had some name brand people in it. Tommy Lee Jones I just don't want to ruin the whole story for you, but he gets killed in the first volley. Okay, and the little boy is his son. And he sees this happen. It's first blood, all that kind of stuff. It's a coming of age thing for him. It's on the internet. You can find it and you can watch it. A little over an hour and a half, I think. I about wore out my VHS copy of it, showing it to kids. Because it's very touching. When those guys died on the green, they didn't take them to Dover and fix them all up to be in a casket and ready to be buried. They took them home to their own bed, laid them out in their own home. Their women and children were there. It was a very personal thing. Anyway, so these guys rode around, and when those first volleys were fired in Lexington and Concord, there were a lot of other people. The hornet's nest had been kicked over. And so all of those other people that heard about it during the night rides of these 40 other individuals, they gathered their ball and powder and they chased the British back to Massachusetts. I'm firmly convinced that if the British had not been reinforced from Boston, they would have been annihilated completely. 600 Brits would have been killed that morning because these guys, they had come to love liberty more than their lives, and when their fellow man was impinged upon, they wanted in. So anyway, 19th of April, shot heard around the world. And why did they come that morning to Lexington, Concord? Oh, I don't know. There must have been a morning stroll they were out for, or something like that, probably, I'm guessing. Yeah, they wanted to disarm the colonists. They were taking their ball and powder. Two other people that were supposed to be picked up was Sam Adams and John Hancock. They were the two that they considered to be the rabble rousers that were kicking up the dust about getting free. So anyway, everybody got notified and they had a response. Okay. So that's why the tyrants were scared. They were well aware of the dangers of an armed citizenry. And another one I didn't tell the kids to watch, but maybe you might want to. I know it's a movie too, but The Patriot, Mel Gibson. You know, we don't want this armed disaster. And you know, remember the story with Mel Gibson? He was a World War II veteran. No, he was a French and Indian War veteran, and he was really a hero. And he was against the war. He said, "Nope." He says, "If you do this," he says, "your women and children are going to see things you wish they wouldn't see. I don't want to bring that to my family." But then when it really came and it was really there, he was all in. Okay, but he was not a voice advocating violence and all this kind of stuff. He had been there, seen it, done that, and knew what the blood tasted like. Okay, so let's go back and read the words the American Founding Fathers wrote after the Revolution and when they were writing the Constitution or thereabouts. Okay, so here's James Madison. Now, by the way, him and George Mason were the principal authors of the Second Amendment, just in case I forget to mention that again. So, in Federalist Paper 46, these were the papers written to convince the nation to ratify the Constitution. They were written in the newspapers. People read these. Oh, here's the newspaper. Here's this article about, you know, whatever. And this was before the Constitution was ratified. This was before the Second Amendment became an issue. They just thought you ought to ratify the Constitution as it was because the Constitution did not delegate enough authority to the general government to take away our rights. And so what he's writing about is pre-Second Amendment, but also with the full understanding that the right for self-defense is a God-given right. So here's James Madison. The Constitution preserves the advantage of being armed, which Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation where the governments are afraid to trust the people with their arms. See, they hadn't taken away the people's right to be armed, so you ought to ratify this. Well, no, we still want a Bill of Rights. Okay, anyway, that's another discussion. So when he was on the floor of the House, when the government was first constituted in 1789, he said, "The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people, trained to arms, is the best and most natural defense of a free country." By the way, I think it's Article 15 of the Utah Constitution, been there since 1895, has been ignored for, what is it now, 130 years, where it says Utah needs to have a recognized militia and arm them and prepare them. Utah goes, "Oh, no, don't talk to me about that. Those gun things are scary." Anyway, I'm getting off point, but Utah's Constitution specifically said, composed of the body of the people. It defines who the militia is in Utah. You're going to see here shortly who the militia are in the United States. And it's everybody but a few officials in the government. In Utah, they're from 18 to 45, but for the nation, they consider the definition to be pretty broad, much broader than that. Okay, so a body of people trained in arms is the best and most natural defense of a country. Going on to Richard Henry Lee, and it gives at the beginning there, this guy's been an active patriot for a lot of years, and I won't go through all of it and try and make you be impressed with him. But whereas, he says, to preserve liberty, it is essential that the whole body of the people always possess arms and be taught alike, especially when young, how to use them. Okay. See, I started shooting when I was 4 years old. Your dad must have been a damn fool. You know, that's the stuff I hear. No, we did okay. Anyway, I'd probably had 20,000 trigger pulls before I was 20. No, 18 probably, when I went in the military. Anyway, young people, okay? Boy, I wish there was time I didn't put it in here. What Patrick Henry wrote to his, not Patrick Henry, Thomas Jefferson wrote to his nephew, Peter Carr, about when you go exercise. You don't take a ball or anything. You take your gun. Yeah, that's how I grew up, a gun in my hands every night after school or whatever. Anyway, a lot of people in my day used to bring guns to school. Why? Not to shoot anybody, but they'd been out duck hunting in the morning, or after school they were going rabbit hunting. So they had guns. I always kept mine in my locker, but some kids gave them to the principal's office. But anyway, it wasn't a federal offense in those days. We didn't shoot each other. Okay, so here's what Patrick Henry wrote. The great object is that every man be armed. Everyone who is able may have a gun. Everyone. And here's what Thomas Jefferson wrote. No free man shall ever be debarred the use of arms. He was talking about what it should be written into the Virginia Constitution. Sam Adams, one of the fathers of the Revolution, the Constitution shall never be construed to prevent the people of the United States or peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms. Here's the other co-author of the Second Amendment with Patrick Henry. It's Patrick Henry. Why do I still have Patrick on my mind? James Madison. So he was James Madison's partner in this. I asked her, what is the militia? This is important, by the way. It is the whole people except for a few public officials. It's everybody. That's what they believed in their day. Here's what Noah Webster wrote. He was a founding father, and he was a wonderful Christian and an amazing scholar. And we don't need to get off on some of his scholarship, but he was absolutely incredible. He said, before a standing army or a tyrannical government can rule, the people must be disarmed, as they are in almost every kingdom in Europe. The supreme power in America cannot enforce unjust laws by the sword, because the whole body of the people are armed and constitute a force superior to any band of regular or professional troops that can be, on any pretense, raised in the United States. That's why Japan didn't come land in LA or somewhere up the coast, I don't know. Everybody behind every tree has a gun, for crying out loud. This is going to be a mess. See, they had to come across the whole ocean to resupply their army. All we had to do was go in our closets. Anyway. All right, let's go on to this next guy, St. George Tucker. This is kind of a long statement. St. George Tucker, we've talked about him before. Some of you may remember him. Maybe some haven't heard of him at this point. I consider him to be the preeminent constitutional scholar of the American founding era. This man was incredible. And he uses words that a lot of people don't use or hear much today. So in parentheses, I've got defining those words. So about keeping and bearing arms, he says, this may be considered as the true palladium of liberty, defining that as palladium being something that affords effectual defense, protection, and safety. So it's how you're going to defend your liberty. The right of self-defense is the first law of nature. In most governments, it has been the study of rulers to confine this right within the narrowest limits possible. Whenever standing armies are kept up, the right of the people to keep and bear arms is, under any color or pretext whatsoever, prohibited. Liberty, if not already annihilated, is on the brink of destruction. So he's saying, if you got armies among you and you can't have guns, sorry folks, you already lost it. Going on. In England, the people have been disarmed, generally under the specious pretext of preserving the game. Oh, we can't have you out shooting pheasants or out shooting deer. We're going to run out of those things, so we're going to take your guns away so you can't do that. Really? Okay. A never-failing lure to bring over the landed aristocracy to support any measure. See, landed aristocracy had the pheasants and the deer on their ground. We don't want the unwashed rabble out here hunting our deer. Yeah, we support this idea. To support any measure under the mast, though calculated for very different purposes. True it is, their Bill of Rights seems to, at first view, to counteract this policy, but the right of bearing arms is confined to Protestants. Huh? Okay, well, if you're a Nazi, you can have them, but you can't if you're a Jew, all right? I mean, where do we see these things replayed constantly, okay? And the words suitable to their condition and degree have been interpreted to authorize the prohibition of keeping a gun or other engine for destruction of game to any farmer or inferior tradesman or other person not qualified to kill game, so that not one man in 500 can keep a gun in his house without being subject to a penalty. So by that time, clear, 1803 was when that was published. In England, he said not a house in 500 has the right to have a gun there. crazy.
That's why you get people who are banned for posting things on Facebook.
Well, obviously they'll come up with any excuse they can. Okay, so if they can't get you for shooting a pheasant, they'll get you for posting a word. Okay, they make every man an offender for a word. I think I've read about that. Good is called evil, and evil is called good. I think Isaiah talked about it. Anyway, you've heard that stuff, and it's happening in our day today. So the preamble of the Bill of Rights tells you why they got the Bill of Rights. And I've pointed out most of it for time. In order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers, meaning the Constitution's power, that further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added to the Constitution. In other words, these are restrictions against government overreach. These are not restrictions on people, they're restrictions on government overreach in the Bill of Rights. Bill of Rights didn't create rights, they canonized those existing rights to prevent government abuse of those rights. Here, the Second Amendment comes up. A well-regulated militia. Are you looking for commas? Okay. You ought to be doing that, okay? Okay, there's only one in this one. You're going to hear the answer in just a minute. I've already kind of overhung the market a little bit. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I like this one better than the 3, one. So, we'll come back to that. Okay. Many of the detractors of the original intent of the founders attempt to twist or detract from the founders' intent about the right of Americans to keep and bear arms. Okay, the argument proposes that the placement of the 3 commas in some of the published versions indicates some perverse interpretation that removes the right to keep and bear arms from the people and makes it a collective right of the state. Say the rules of comma weren't as hard and fast as they are today. And after the Constitution was written, the Bill of Rights was incorporated in the document. Noah Webster Americanized and standardized the spelling and the rules of punctuation. So we can see the evolutionary state of spelling and punctuation that was pretty well standardized by Noah Webster by 1828. Yes?
Could it be that these rules of punctuation were created by someone who wanted to change the meaning?
Well, there are instances. I mean, I could tell you stories. Boy, I wish we had time to hear some of the stories we've had with discussions with people that were opposed to the blessings of liberty and wanted to twist words to mean, democracy, republic. You say, wait, let's not go there, because it should be clearly understood. I remember I was in a radio station in Missoula, Montana, with 2 hosts of the radio station that were absolute virulent opponents to baseline principles. And they wanted to take me to the mat on this thing, not just the punctuation stuff that we're talking about here, but the wording of other things in the Constitution. And they were trying to justify their illogical and tyrannical perspectives, okay? And so we were having this animated discussion back and forth in their studio. There are 2 on that side of the desk, I'm on the other side of the desk, and we all got microphones. And they were a call-in radio station. It was a drive time kind of program. And the calls started coming in. And their audience flipped on them. And it was like, finally, somebody's in your radio station that had some common sense. I wish we'd shut up and let the guy talk. This was the kind of calls that were coming in. And you should have seen their faces. With their audience, they thought they had them all in their palm of their hand. Anyway, they became much more amicable. But the point of the matter is that really common, everyday Americans are willing to hear these things. And you're pointing out that maybe some perverse twisting, somebody may come up and redefine it. That's what these guys were doing. Yeah.
Oh, I'm seeing modern dictionary definitions change year to year.
Well, you're absolutely seeing those change, and the reason is because they can redefine words out of use even. And you need to understand, you do, I'm sure, the Constitution's written in plain English. And those English words have meanings. Those meanings can only be what they were in the day they were written. There's no way that in the day, they're writing it back in 1787, this meaning will be changed in 2025 to mean this, so we'll use it this way. No, illogical, completely irrational. those words can only mean what they meant in the day they were written, and we need to go back and understand those. And that's why in my book here, I've got about 600 words that I went through the farewell address and identified roughly 600, I didn't count them, words that were used in the farewell address that aren't in common usage today. We may think, oh, that's pretty common. Is and alone mean things, right? Okay. You got to stay awake in here. You're going to miss the Bill Clinton jokes. At any rate, you got it. I knew you would. At any rate, and then I defined them out of the Noah Webster 1828 dictionary, because that was the common definitions that were used by the founders. And so when kids take my little course on the farewell address, we discuss every word of it. And then they have to write, and this is over the period of time that we're discussing it, they have to write 6 essays, subject matter of my choice, and discuss it in the tradition of the founding fathers. They have got to say this about that, using the words of the founding fathers. And then they've got to take a spelling test and a definition test of those 600 words. Because if you can define and understand those 600 words, now you can read the Federalist Papers. And if you can read the Federalist Papers and understand them, now you can read St. George Tucker and his stuff. So what you do is you give them language skills to be able to accomplish that. But you're right, they're being changed constantly in today's world. It's a tragic travesty, and the school system is facilitating it, or they don't even read what they're presenting anyway. Okay, so this idea about the commas, yeah.
Related. When I go to One Book, it's a dictionary, or onebook.com, lots of dictionaries. Is there one dictionary that I could count on?
1828 Noah Webster Dictionary.
Okay.
It doesn't have the word transistor in it there, but that has very little to do with freedom. Okay, in fact, most dictionaries around the world don't have transistor. They use the American transistor. Did you have a comment or question?
Yeah. What happens if somebody goes crazy with a gun and they just go crazy, and so people are all upset because you got somebody who had a gun and decided to go crazy with it, and people died because of it, and they just went crazy, and then you have people like, well, we should have guns, or we need to have tighter gun control because we should have people,
Going crazy.
yeah, going crazy is what I'm gonna put it.
Okay, you know what? Tragic things happen. People drive cars off the road or into other people and all that kind of stuff. But if somebody there is shooting at you, I told a chief of police one time that the university I was working at did not want me to have the right to keep and bear arms, the concealed carry. And I told the police officer, I says, how long will it take you to get to my office if somebody's shooting my people in here? He said, probably about 5 minutes. He says, how many times can you reload in 5 minutes if you're carrying multiple mags? He's sitting there kind of with this dumb look on his face. And I says, Steve, I'm only asking for the privilege of shooting back to protect my people. He left without any further comment. So that's the thing, is if you got a bad person, you need to counter that bad person. Just like that woman, I don't know if you were here or not when I told the story about the 911 call where the woman was attacked when she was home alone with her baby. If she had had the ability to shoot back, 6 warning rounds in that guy's chest as he came through the door, that would have solved the problem. He would have died of lead poisoning. So those kinds of things where bad people do bad things, good people have to respond. That's what I would say. Okay, now where did I put there it is. I don't know if we'll get through as much as we can. We're going to be real close. Did you want me to stop at 8:30? Okay. Tomorrow morning I was talking about. No. No. There's probably some in this. You'll be able to have food, water, shelter. You'll be good here. This is a preparedness store. We're going to be good. No, I'm not kidding you. We're going to get through this thing quickly because a lot of times you can only stand sitting so long, and I happen to be one of them. My legs go to sleep on this high chair that I'm sitting on. But, okay. So this idea of commas and rhetorical pauses and all that. We've talked enough about that. Okay, so this one was the one that was passed by Congress in September of 1789 with the 3 commas: a well-regulated militia, comma, being necessary for the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, shall not be infringed. Okay, now I'm overemphasizing that, but to me it's unnecessary. Okay, so it's not a big issue, but some people will take it. They don't mean the people being able to be armed. They mean the people of the state or whatever. They take these perverse views of it. But so this is the amendment that was distributed and ratified by the states with 1 comma only: a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's pretty straightforward. It's kind of like that religious liberties amendment we talked about earlier that was perverted into such a mess by that Castro guy that led Obama's Civil Rights Commission. I'm hoping and praying that somebody does not today, with Trump's review, take a perverse view like that, limiting it to just 4 years. Why don't we straighten out the whole mess, people? Let's stop doing it. Okay, Tucker used this writing in his Constitution and Bill of Rights. Both versions are acceptable. The government uses them in their publications. Historical experts in punctuation says it doesn't adversely affect the intended meaning of the right to keep and bear arms. It was an individual right protected by the Second Amendment. Okay, so the founders of this nation regarded the true purpose of the Second Amendment as that individual right. The Second Amendment of the Constitution unequivocally protects the individual God-given right of all mankind to keep and bear arms, to protect lives, liberty, and property from tyrants, criminals, both foreign and domestic. It is a right that we can't infringe. It is a right that in modern America is in grave danger because of our lack of understanding of this stuff. We have common sense laws that they keep asking for. Oh, well, obviously you don't need 30 rounds to go shoot a deer. After all, they're just deer. Or, they've just muddy the stuff using completely irrelevant arguments. And that's what Hosea wrote about. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. We, the people today, lack the knowledge to be able to protect our God-given rights. We lack the historical perspective. I would that Americans knew their history as well as Putin knows the Russian history. Putin is a far better, probably Christian than Biden was, and certainly leader of his people because he had his people's best interest in mind. Messed up on a lot of things, but he far and away ahead of what Joe Biden was doing. I hope and pray that Joe has not allowed to be passed on to his successor some of the stumbling blocks that are in there. I hope that Donald Trump stopped listening to people that are giving him bad advice. Here's Isaiah. He wrote, "Therefore my people are gone into captivity because they have no knowledge, and their honorable men are famished." Unfortunately, so many of our quote-unquote honorable men and women in legislative assignments, administrative assignments, judicial assignments, whatever, they're really famished. They're skin and bones, they're emaciated, they're ready to dry up and blow away when it comes to principles, but they still hold high position and they can mess up the country further from where we are. Late in his life, Thomas Jefferson wrote, "If a nation expects to be ignorant and free," a lot of people leave this little part in here, leave it out, "in a state of civilization," so I whited it out, but it means the same anyway. It expects what never was and never will be. If you expect to be ignorant and free, you're not going to be. So that's the state of affairs in America today. So next time, we're going to, see, I buzzed through that pretty quick, didn't I? The next time, we're going to review the Second Amendment and evolution of falsehoods becoming law, global examples of citizens being disarmed, and the modern perversion of this God-given right. So, till then, take care. I need all the friends I can get. Yeah, I hope so. I need armed friends. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
No,
You're an armed friend. That's good too. Yeah, say again? I know, we kind of hurried when I'm going, okay.
Okay, shiny object.
Shiny objects. I don't know, we got any shiny objects? Come up here, Enoch, and you can, well, oh man. I need a drink and you guys don't know what's in here. I've got the mic here, Enoch.
Okay.
This is the
Yep.
one that was working.
Okay. I'm just, I'll just use this mic. Thank you. So you weren't tempted to just keep going for an hour?
No,
Okay.
I had mercy.
Hey, yeah, that's great. So we have a part 2 of the Second Amendment, and we'll probably do that next month. We were considering maybe do we take the summer off, but we have a good turnout anyway in the summer, so we don't have to take a break. We can probably keep going. I don't know. Does anyone want to vote on that? Keep going. 'Cause July is very busy. We could do that.
Some of the people that regularly do take the summer off because they have such a fallout for vacations
Mhm.
and holidays and all that kind of stuff, and so they want to do that. But so it wouldn't be unheard of to have that happen. But if we do want to do something, I'll just offer, we could do a video broadcast that you could pick up and rebroadcast if you wanted. I know it's better to have interactive with people and live bodies and all this kind of stuff. But if it came right down to doing something or nothing, and that was the best solution, I'd be willing to do that too. We've got that capability.
Okay, so we'll announce over our email list. Does everyone get the emails every month, and that's kind of how you're like, okay, it's still happening, or just kind of curious? Facebook? Yeah, you do? Okay. Okay, where did you guys hear about the event, if you don't mind me asking? Oh, family. Nice, great. Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, so all right, so we'll kind of figure out the summer schedule. Maybe we'll keep going, or maybe we will take July off. We'll kind of decide. I guess next month is June, so we could just do June and do part 2. Okay, something like that. All right, great. Well, so as Scott discussed the Second Amendment, and I talked about how we have to enforce that ourselves at the local level in our communities, and it was interesting how he mentioned the red flag law, how that is being implemented from the Trump administration's first tenure, and so where this is likely going. And how he said, yeah, they didn't make a federal law that said, hey, we're going to do this red flag law thing. We'll just we'll create a fund, and then the locals can piece by piece implement at the local level this tyranny.
Just parenthetically make a statement that for some years now, there have been a number of Utah Republican legislators that are absolutely determined to have Utah create statewide law.
Okay, yeah. So Scott was saying that there is a movement in Utah among certain legislators to create a state level red flag law. Regardless of whether that happens or whether it's just city ordinances piece by piece, the answer is the same. It's citizens in the local community saying, not in our town, which requires people to be organized and just have a little bit of an understanding of how to do that effectively. So I would invite everyone, again, our online audience, go to shop.defendingutah.org, and you can pick up one of these, which is a manual on how to organize and be an advocate for the Constitution in your town. But whether it's this red flag law thing, this pattern of enforcing a federal idea at the local level, it's a backdoor to tyranny into our local towns. They've done it in education. right? They've done it. It's a pattern they're following, and they're doing it. They actually have a backdoor path through what they call regional governments in the United States. Got a whole presentation on that on our YouTube channel. If you look up regional, it's a nice little video on that, and it lays this all out. There is a parallel, unelected government in our nation through a system of regional government, unofficial organizations, or unofficial governments, quasi-governments. And so they pass this down to the local level, and then the city council gets advice from somebody, and they pass it as if it's local law. Do you have a question? Oh, you're just stretching. Okay. So I guess so we have more questions? Oh, that is a wonderful question. How could we have an unelected regional government? This is what I've tried to explain in some of my classes, and it's sort of, you have to mentally wrap your mind around this concept. If you do, so I'm going to try to explain this. If you can wrap your mind around it, you'll realize anybody can use this same power. And that's why the principle of committees works. Scott talked about the committees of correspondence, right? It's a natural law that they are using. So basically, the elite get together with their best friends, and they say, doesn't this freedom thing suck? We have less power. We want to control everybody. Let's get together and let's just pretend we have power. And if we do it long enough and we act like we have power, we'll actually start having power, right? It's a natural law of claim, use, defend. Let's pretend we have power and act like we're in charge. And if nobody resists and no one knows any different, it'll actually start working. I can trace this idea back to, I think, at least 1903-ish in Utah, the Utah League of Cities and Towns. Now, so what they're doing is they're combining as private individuals behind the scenes. Combinations, okay? A lot of them are, some are, but the regional governments are not secret combinations, so to speak, in a way, because they are, but they aren't, right? It's a gray area. There are secret combinations behind the scenes, and we have plenty of videos and books on that. But they create a level that's right up, it's like layers of combinations, right? Behind the scenes, and then less behind the scenes, until eventually it's the regional governments, and then they're right behind the actual governments. And so they actually write a constitution for these regional governments, and then they invite their friends to join. And then they actually have mock legislative sessions. And then they put it on their websites. You can find the websites for all these organizations. And then these mock legislative sessions, they create policy so it looks like a government. And when they're done, they're just like, hey, Joe, you're on the city council, right? No, good thing we invited you. Go take that to the city council and pass it. Okay, so does that make sense? So what can we do as committees? Well, Noah Webster, as you mentioned, Noah Webster tonight defined combination in the dictionary. And he explained there are combinations to overthrow freedom, and then there are combinations to resist oppression. He's saying this is a natural law used either direction. No one knew that the founding fathers were combinations to resist oppression. Simply just means the people organize. When the people organize, you naturally harness your inalienable rights. There's power behind those rights. And your rights, we harness our power as a group. And that is natural authority. And that's what my book is about, a lot of that, kind of how you naturally use that in a peaceful way, peace through the strength of a large body of people. And so when you have a combination of good people and you say, we're standing on the Constitution, we're organizing a citizen group in our town, you can then use the same natural law in reverse. And the community can then begin to recognize, hey, these guys that have organized, they're always talking about the Constitution. They knock on my door and they teach me about the principles, and they explain what the city council is doing is wrong. And you begin teaching your community, and you naturally start gaining some authority in the eyes of the public. if that makes sense, right? And then the city council now realizes if they don't listen to you, the people are no longer in supportive of what the council's doing, right? So a lot of principles like that you wrap your mind around. But evil has been using this against us. If we just pretend to run, and we got friends in the presidency. There was I talked about that in my class, how there was an individual who wrote a document to, I think it was FDR. I'm forgetting the president. It was like in the 1930s, roughly, right? 30s, 40s. And he said, hey, we should, through the executive branch, start implementing regionalism as a way to get around constitutional restrictions. And it was adopted as US policy at the level of the president. In the executive branch, bypassing the legislative, bypassing the judicial. So it just means that's what the executive branch is doing. And so we can know they're doing it, but we can use the other branches or local nullification to stop it kind of one by one. So long answer to your question, right? I don't know if that helps, but yeah, that's how they do it. Any other questions, Nat? You have a question? Sure, the red flag law. Okay, so yeah, you came in a little bit later. The red flag law is when, very simply put, it's a law that would say if you find a red flag on somebody, you can take their rights away. Oh, what's a red flag? Somebody makes a phone call. My neighbor's looking a little crazy. He had googly eyes last time I went over there, and I think he's like mad at me. And oh, that's dangerous. It's a red flag. Let's go take his guns away. Right? That's what they mean by red flag laws. So they're creating a path where they want to create a culture where people tell on their neighbors, right? This is very much East Germany type stuff, right? Tattletale kinds of things. And in that culture, if they can create a regulatory framework through the executive branch or any framework, if the legislature of Utah would do it, anyone. But if the law says, hey, you can tell us there's something crazy about your neighbor, if they can get away with that. But obviously we know you can't have your rights taken away without due process. So therefore, these laws are unconstitutional. There's a path where if you have been a danger, you could, through due process, find out if you've actually broken a law. And then if it's legitimate and constitutional, your rights could be restricted. Do you agree with the way I explained that, Dr. Bradley? Yeah. So they are not going to go through due process for 1,000 people in a small town. They might just say they would rather have red flag laws there to try to disarm a small town of farmers, for example, that wanted to, protect their community. Any other questions? I guess these are some good questions. Okay. You have one more question?
So is red flag laws safe or are they dangerous? I think they're dangerous. So I think that it's okay to tattle on your neighbor, but there needs to be a good cause to say, hey, this is a problem. But if you don't have like a really good case, then you need to stay out of your neighbor's business.
Yeah, I agree. We need to stay out of our neighbor's business. And to answer your question, yes, red flag laws are very dangerous because what you just said is if there's not a good case, that's due process you're talking about. We have a fundamental right that if somebody accuses us of something, we have a right to due process. And there has to be a substantial amount of evidence that you've actually broken a law, a valid constitutional law, right? So all of that is very important.
Yeah.
Definitely.
We had child.
Yeah, you could think of lots of examples like that, definitely. Okay, thanks everyone. If you're not on our mailing list, please subscribe, share this with your friends and family. Thank you. Thank you for coming. And we'll see you guys next time.